Hey, welcome back to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin, and I'm excited to welcome Robbie Shaw to the show. So, Robbie, welcome to Men Pursuing More podcast.
Thank you, Roger. Great to be here. I appreciate the invite.
So, Robbie, let's talk a little bit about your journey. Kind of marked some kind of high level athletics. We know there's some deep struggles. And growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, became kind of a standout high school player. You actually had the opportunity to play for the North Carolina Tar Heels, and we're gonna be talking about that. And so you experienced success early, but behind the scenes, I know this to be further in the podcast, but your addiction and alcohol began to kind of take a hold after you kind of moved to. I know things were happening before then, but after you moved to New York City. So today, Robbie is sober, owns a podcast production company, and spent 5 years hosting a wellness-focused podcast centered on mental health. And I can't wait to hear more about that. And his story is honest, raw, and deeply impactful for men navigating identity, pressure, purpose. So, Robbie, it is such an honor to have you on the podcast today.
I'm equally as honored. I love coming on and talking about this stuff. This is the gold stuff. This is the stuff that's hard to talk about, which makes it that much better.
And that's what people want. They want someone to be authentic, a willingness to kind of share their story. And so you become a little vulnerable, but we appreciate that. So before we get into your story, we need some warm-up questions. So the first one is, what your favorite all-time, I know there's probably many, favorite all-time basketball memory?
You know what's funny is favorite all-time basketball memory. Okay, I thought you were going to hit me with the favorite player. All right, so my favorite memory, senior year high school state tournament. We are not very good. We're in like the quarterfinals and we are going to lose. My high school was very good when I was a junior. My senior year, we were not very good. And it's the final game. I think we're down 18 and there's maybe 20 seconds left. And it's the end of what I think, because I'm not on scholarship to go play after this, it's the end of my basketball career. And I run over and say, give me the ball. And I take the ball and dribble to the other side of the court and dunk the living heck out of it. And I mean, it was like the buzzer beater dunk, two hands, all my friends go crazy. And we lost and hung our heads walking to the locker room. You know, as egotistical as that sounds, it was a great memory.
Well, you have all your friends and people are probably cheering, even though there was a loss. Everybody's, what a great finish.
Oh, it was so good. It just took the wind out of everybody at the very end. It was awesome.
Well, getting back to the next question, you brought this up about all-time basketball player, like favorite, college, pro. Well, a lot of you probably went from college to pro, but
yeah. And you know, you did send me some prep questions and this was one of them. And of course I read it and I've had 2 weeks to think about this and I still don't have the number one answer. So I'll have to preface it like, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite meal? Who's your favorite child? Super hard to pick, but for the sake of the podcast, I will choose one and I'll choose this person based on all the factors: the entertainment, the relationship, the member of a Tar Heel family, you know, all these things. And my number one favorite player of all time is Vince Carter.
I like it. Vince Carter.
I mean, he never ceases to amaze. Nobody has ever done the things he's done. I don't know how he was able to do it. And you still look back at his highlights and there's nobody doing what he did.
I agree. Yeah, he was dynamic.
I was there with him. I mean, I used to practice with him. It was just unbelievable.
What was that, just real quick, what was that like practicing with him? Because he was a dynamic player. I mean,
it was insane. It's super hard to describe in a way that someone can go, oh, I know what you mean. You have to be there. You have to be standing next to a guy who just feels surreal. He's larger than life. When he jumps, you feel like you're looking up in the rafters. It's the most insane athletic ability you've ever seen.
And he brought that not only from college, he brought that in the NBA all those years too.
Oh yeah.
I mean
that dunk contest he was in it's still one of the greatest ever.
And you're a ball player, so And I was going to ask favorite all-time sports team, and I assume it's probably the North Carolina Tar Heels.
I mean, all around team, yes. That's the team that can ruin my life. Can make me the happiest man alive and the most angry man alive as well. It's the only team that can do that.
So with Vince Carter, I mean, you stand like your height, what, 6'5", 6'6", or
6'4".
okay, 6'4", I'm 6'3", and he was about what, 6'7", 6'8", Vince Carter.
I think he was a little shorter than that. I think he was closer to 6'7". Yeah, he wasn't super tall. Couple few inches taller than me.
But when he elevated, it was a whole nother world.
Unlike anybody else. And his wingspan and just all that stuff, his reach was just outrageous. It wasn't just his jump, it was those long arms, those big hands. He was just a natural born basketball player.
I remember seeing, just watching him play and his arms just hanging down. It's like, my goodness, his arms are like hanging down to the floor.
And they're like floppy too. Like he wasn't stiff. He was just so loose and good. He had a great jumper.
And
Yeah,
him defending you, it's like, how am I going to get around this guy? He's not only athletic and quick and all that. If I got to have some distance. If I'm going to release my shot, I better have a quick release because Vince Carter is going to get a piece of it.
He's coming. Yeah, even if you get around him, he's coming.
Yeah, if you're managed to get around, there was a lot. Well, Robbie, let's get into your story where you grew up in North Carolina, and basketball, I know, played a huge role early in your life. So take us back to the upbringing, kind of your family, your environment you grew up in, and how basketball became kind of a big part of your kind of identity.
Yeah. It's interesting. You hear people tell stories about their upbringing and what led to, some of the success, specifically in sports. And the most exciting thing you hear is when someone, was passionate at 5 years old and was just, almost obsessed and would just work at it and became this, this player with success and earned it. And well, that wasn't me. That wasn't me.
I thought that was going to be you.
And those are the stories like the Roger Federers. You look at these people and you're just like, wow, that sounds so cool. I hope my kid does that. Well, I was not that kid. I was a kid who grew up in a family that my mother and father both came from very modest means. My mother grew up on a farm. Her mother, sewed her clothes. Like they were super, super poor, lived out in the country outside of Charlotte. And my mother was very attractive. She just was born into this family, farmers, just old rugged people. And she was just gorgeous. And so she had this thing where she knew she could get out of what she considered to be a situation. My father came from not on a farm, but equally as modest. And they both just had this drive to be, I don't want to say rich and famous, but they were both attractive. And so they had this kind of surface level motivation goal of being, glamorous, wealthy, and successful. And they just both had this drive. And when they met each other, it was like this spark came together and they're like, we can do this together. And for the most part, they did. Now that story ends in kind of an ugly way because addiction kind of riddled, their world with my father being an alcoholic. Of course, you can go deep into that world and why that drive for those, bells and whistles and money and success and image results in something not so wholesome and has the potential to hurt more than help. And that is the story. But I grew up in this household where, early on, my dad was a very smart businessman. He worked his tail off. My mother was, the beautiful wife, the doting Southern wife, and they made it. They made it to their country club or whatever it is they were looking to get at. And I was the kid during that time. I had the things, I had what I wanted, I guess you could say. We lived in a nice house. We did all those things. And I tell that because it's very important as to how I turned out. I don't think it did me really any favors to have that kind of opportunity. Now, I'm not saying everybody that has opportunities like that and fortune like that is going to turn out the way I did. There was a lot involved, like I mentioned, the alcoholism and those kinds of things. And so as I'm growing up, I'm in a household where image is number one. And what comes with that is a lack of true, authentic love. It's love is transactional. You have to earn it. And the way that I was able to earn love was to enhance their image. And so basketball became my way of doing that. My father was extremely proud of that. My mother was extremely proud of that. They bragged about it. They talked about it. They wanted me to, go on and be this basketball player. It was the thing that I was good at naturally. I worked at it, but I'm not sure if I was working at it for the right reasons. I don't mean to go off on too many side notes here, but just giving you an idea of what led to the basketball and where I was in my head with it, because like I said, it wasn't this like deep passion I had for the sport. It was the return of love and attention that I got for it, if that makes sense.
Mhm. So you're playing basketball to get the attention from your parents
Yes, the crowd
and
and
the crowd, yeah.
friends and the city, and like I said, I wasn't that great of a player early on. I mean, I was tall, so it just naturally came to me, but I wasn't a star player in junior high and this prodigy. I got good my 10th grade year. And I don't know what it was. I was dying to be able to dunk the ball. And so my friend and I would just work at dunking over and over. And eventually, when you work that hard at it, you eventually dunk it. And when you dunk it and everybody sees you dunk it, holy cow.
Mhm.
Now it's like you're a real player. You can go play on the playgrounds. And if you can dunk it, you get respect. And so once I reached that level, which was 10th grade, then the attention, the popularity, the respect started coming in. And that really boosted, I guess you could call it an obsession with it.
Mhm.
I worked pretty hard at it after that
And
and
it
got
kind of
pretty good.
and it really boosts your ego, and that could be in a good or not so good way. Your identity now becomes because people see you as this basketball player, this dunker, this guy, really improving his game. Hey, look at this player at our high school. And so like you said, the fans know who you are, like kids in school know who you are. I mean, you stand out
Yeah.
because you're taller too. The community knows who you are, and your parents are probably loving the attention too, you know?
Everything you said. I mean, that's exactly what it was like. And then, fast forward up into my junior and senior year, and I'm on an AAU team that wins the states and comes 6th in the nation. I had my highest scoring game against Antoine Jameson with 35 points.
Mm.
And all of a sudden I'm a star. People, and I have to say this, and there's people who frown when I mention this, but I was one of 2 white guys on an all African American basketball team. And there is back in 1993 and 94, there's a level of respect that came with that. You stood out for sure.
Mhm.
That was an interesting time. And I want to go back to the environment I grew up in, because we did have, financial means. I grew up in an environment where we had things. We were a member of the country club. All my friends went to private schools, but my mother growing up on the farm and my dad being from modest means, they believed in public school. In the neighborhood we lived in, I was zoned for a school on the outskirts of Charlotte that was predominantly black. And so I was this white kid who hid the fact that he had money, because you don't want that known,
Mhm.
playing on a basketball team with 98% African Americans, and you're the only white guy, and you can dunk, and you're scoring on everybody, and so it was a cool time. Of course, looking back, it's like, was I doing it for the right reasons? Who knows? Who cares? It was pretty awesome.
But a key thing about that, you kinda earn the respect because you could walk into that environment and be afraid. And, you could really mess up your game, your kinda mindset in the game, just able to kinda play at the level that you wanna play at. And just by earning that respect, having that kinda that confidence and removing the fear, it's like, "Hey, we're all here for a reason to play basketball." And for you to earn that, earn that respect because that's what it really takes because if you came in and you really couldn't really you were okay at the game and you were kinda, like, fearful and all that, you're not really gonna earn that respect because 'cause they're gonna say, "Well, why are you here? Why did you even step on this court to play when you think you have a game, but you're not very confident in your game. It's like, why the heck did you show up here? And so
Oh,
you
yeah.
just kind of proved it on the basketball court, but that's kind of like in life too. You have to earn that respect. And I know it's kind of hard for some people to push away, become a little vulnerable and push away that fear. Fear is okay. It's okay to get a little uncomfortable, but you earned it. You earned that. You earned that respect.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, it's fun to have these conversations because it uncovers things that I don't always think about. So often I can go down a certain path in the way that I'm thinking about things. But then when I listen to you, it's a little bit more positive and uplifting. And I forget those things sometimes, So I do appreciate that because there is a level of intimidation that comes in sports. I mean, you know this, like
Mhm.
you show up at especially a playground and you're this white guy. I hate to do the race thing, but it was just a thing, if I were to go out into the hood where it's predominantly African American and I'm trying to play on a basketball court with these guys, I mean, they are intimidating me and whoever's there is intimidating you. They're talking trash, they're pinching you when they're guarding you. I mean, they're talking about kicking your butt, like, all those things are meant to intimidate the living heck out of you, and they do until you overcome it and you prove yourself and you dunk on one of them, or, you push through the fear and the discomfort and finally get to a point where they give you a little respect, and then you can build on that and grow, and it's pretty fascinating.
And why I brought that up, because after high school, I was kind of a basketball junkie. I played in tournaments all over the country. And one thing I learned was when you walk in the court, whatever court that might be, in Indianapolis, or I was out in New Jersey, I was in Long Island, I think I might have said Chicago. I mean, wherever I went, I wanted to find somewhere I could play competitive basketball against wherever a pickup
Oh,
game was, and where's some of the best pickup ball in
well,
the
you know
cities.
exactly what I'm talking about
I
then.
do. And it's like, you got to show up. And it's like, I was sometimes the only Caucasian guy. It even happened in the Twin Cities here at times, that being honored. And I'm like, wow, I'm the only white guy. I mean, some people might be fearful of that. It's like, no, we're all here for the same reason. There
Yeah.
might be all trash talking, but anytime you go on, like, it's not your court, it's their court. Yeah, they're gonna test you. It's
Oh,
just
yeah.
like when you go into a new culture and all that, they're gonna test you to see if you're really intentional, you really deserve to be here, and can you handle it? Can you handle the trash talking? Can you handle playing with these group of guys? And then when you show you can, you just earn the respect. And I always talk about how then afterwards, the conversations begin. But you won't have those conversations if you never earn the respect on the court.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you are,
It's a great analogy to the rest of life too, and I know that's probably where you go with this stuff, but the sports and the teams and the competitiveness and the failure and the success and the respect is such a great metaphor for life. So good.
and that's so cool about, like, what you can gain from being involved in sports,
Yeah.
competitive sports. And I mean, I know the good and bad and go along with it, but I think there's a lot you can take from it and move forward, and really teach others, but also teachable moments for yourself too, to reflect back on.
Mhm.
All right, well, let's continue on your story. I know you had the opportunity to play at UNC, the University of North Carolina Tar Heels.
Oh, yeah.
Share with us about that in 1995 under the legendary coach Dean Smith, and then also, I know you brought up about Phil Ford on the staff. And what did that kind of environment teach you about certain things? Let's say discipline, excellence, just being part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, earlier when you were giving a little bit of some highlights of my story, and when we talked about the addiction coming into my life, this was the time that it started.
Mm,
So my freshman year and sophomore year in college is when it began becoming something noticeable, and that was while I was playing basketball. I think I'll answer your question, but I'll start with the summer before my freshman year. I had I had shin splints in my shin, and you know this, but the shin splints are essentially micro fractures,
mhm.
and they had joined together and created a one big thick fracture straight through the center of my shin. And of course, I didn't know this, and I'm playing in all these pro-ams and these summer leagues and this stuff, and my shin is just hurting. It's hurting. It's hurting. And I go get an X-ray, and there is a crack halfway through it. And the doctor was like, "A couple more games, and then that thing was going to snap." So that's that was the summer prior to my freshman year in college, and I knew I was going to go try out for the JV team at Chapel Hill. You have to try out, but there were letters written there to Dean Smith and Guthridge and Phil Ford, and that whole team was, "Hey, look out for this guy. He's coming. He's coming." And so I go and I try out and I make the team, but I'm not at 100%. And unfortunately, my senior year and into the beginning of the summer, I was 110%. I was the best I'd ever been. And then that happened to my shin. And I essentially had to take like 3 months off and be in a cast and heal this fracture. So it kind of hurt me as I went into freshman year JV team. They had heard enough about me that I got a little bit of grace, made the team. And back to what you brought up, Dean Smith is the varsity coach. Phil Ford is the JV coach. I mean, I'm playing under Phil Ford, All-American. I mean, anybody who knows basketball knows who Phil Ford is. It was one of the coolest experiences I'll ever be able to draw up in my life, especially having Dean Smith as the varsity coach. Now, they are very secretive. Varsity is. So the JV is, we're not practicing with them every practice. There's a few times where Dean needed some dummy defensive men and some people to run plays. And so he would call the JV team in and we would run plays with them. And that happens, a few times during the season. But of course, we play before every home game. We sit behind the varsity bench at every home game. You get free shoes, you get free gear. It's all Jordan stuff. I mean, Jordan's coming and saying hello. Like, it was super, super cool. To answer your question, what did that lead to as far as, the takeaways from that experience? And, I led with all of that because I wish I was more involved. I wish my addiction had not started picking up. I wish that I didn't crack my shin. I think it would have been a much bigger and better experience than I'm able to report, despite all those cool things that I just shared. But ultimately, like I said, this is when my problems internally began to kind of rear their head. And we can get into that now, or if you want to ask some more questions about, the basketball stuff, that's perfectly fine. But that's where this is going to start. And that's probably where we're going to have to naturally go.
Well, let's talk about that now. So we've had the opportunity to talk a lot about your basketball experience, a little bit of my basketball experience, but your basketball experience growing up. Tell us about now, after graduating, you moved to New York City, and share with the listeners about just this, where alcohol and kind of that addiction really picked up steam, and kind of that change in that season. How did that transition away from basketball impact you? You shared a little bit about that, just not having basketball in your life.
Well, it was prior to New York. So you play JV for 2 years and then you have a chance to go up to varsity. And at that point, there was no chance I was going to make it up to varsity. I wasn't even playing much on JV. Like I said, my internal problems began to pick up, and I'll tell you why. It was because I had a heartbreak. First time in my life, I had a real heartbreak. And I bring this up because there are a lot of men out there that are not going to talk about their first heartbreak. They're not going to admit that it was a heartbreak. And they're not going to even know what the feelings are associated with something that hurts that deeply. And that was what happened to me my sophomore year in college. Was I lost my first love as a result of my bad decisions, and it broke me. I didn't know how to handle it. I grew up in an environment where things were given to me. I mean, I did earn a lot of it, but a lot of it was given. I was not very experienced with that level of what I would consider to be failure. And so when I hit that moment, it was the most teachable moment of my entire life, because I had not felt anything like that prior to that point. And I did not know how to handle it other than to pour alcohol and what eventually led to drugs on it. And so prior to moving to New York City, I was in and out of college. I would come home to Charlotte. I would get in trouble with the law. I would drink and drive. I was arrested multiple times. I had multiple DUIs. I went to rehab. I went to detoxes. I failed out of college. And then, over this course of like 7 years of just turmoil, I eventually somehow garnered up enough hours to graduate from Chapel Hill. And so I have a degree from Chapel Hill, and everybody says I should be a doctor, but that's an ongoing joke. But I did graduate, and then I moved to New York City. And I mean, that is after just this 5 years of real turmoil, depression, anxiety, panic, addiction, all the stuff. And I had lost my driver's license at this point because I had DUIs. And so we thought, all right, well, you've graduated. All your friends live in New York City. Why don't you move up there? You don't need a license.
Hmm.
Get a job and see what you can make of yourself. And so that's what I attempted to do. And then, when we get to New York is New York. And anybody that's ever been there can understand that a 22-year-old
Hmm.
who already has problems with temptations and covering things up and finding artificial ways to feel good, New York is a devil's den for that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. And so it just picked up even more. And there's a lot of people that look at that and they think, oh man, maybe you shouldn't have moved there. Maybe that wasn't the right decision. And I'm like, man, that was the right decision, because all it did was push my level of suffering and internal turmoil to a point of breaking. And it led to a life of sobriety and recovery and redemption. So New York was the best move I could have made, even though it was some wild years.
I was going to say, because some people say, "Oh, who would convince you to go there? Oh, if you could have, maybe." But like you're saying, your perspective it is, hey, it was the best move that ever could have. It's your journey, and the best thing that could ever happen to you, because it led to you, eventually sobriety and to a breaking point.
Yeah, yeah, it was the great. I hear, there's a guy named Steve O who used to be on that show Jackass, and he talks a lot about how grateful he is that he didn't have just a little bit of addiction, that he really had full blown alcoholism addiction, because if he only had a little, he would just be suffering kind of at a above average way for the majority of his life. And he would look back and be like, God, I wasted so much time just kind of being in and out of that place. Whereas when you've got it full blown, it leads you to a breaking point, and then you can come out on the other side and really start, working on life.
Well, share with us, because the listeners are wondering, like, what was the breaking point? And then
Yeah.
where did you go from there? Because some people get to the breaking point and they're just kind of at the breaking point for a long period of time. So share with the listeners.
Yeah. I mean, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, you could say that my breaking point, there was probably 4 or 5 of them. There was definitely,
Mhm.
these times where I would get, my 3rd DUI and the judge would take my license away for 5 years. You would think that would be my breaking point. I didn't get sober for another 7 years after that. So these big things would happen, and most of them were external consequences as a result of bad decisions and bad behavior and all those things. But the breaking point had to be internal. And yes, a lot of the internal comes from, the piling up of the external. But ultimately, what led to my break was the right amount of suffering. I think Ben Affleck says it the best. He's like, there's one thing that'll get somebody sober, and it's the right amount of suffering. And that's essentially what happened. It was, I was in my almost my 4th year in New York City. I was on my 3rd job. I mean, I couldn't get out of bed without drinking. It was just the darkest, most ugly place I'd ever been, and not externally, fully internally. It was just, you get to the point where I wasn't suicidal, but I essentially was. There was just zero lust for life, shell of a man, no identity, nothing to show for, just pure embarrassment and darkness. And that was the breaking point.
Now, did others point that out? I'm sure people point out a thing.
They tried.
Yeah, they tried. That's how people do. They try. But it got to the
Mhm.
point where you have to take ownership of it. I know with my sister went through 20 years as a drug addict, and eventually she had to take ownership of and put herself in a rehab.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I essentially, called my brother. I couldn't call my mom or my dad anymore. Called my brother. It was like, "Man, I'm done. I don't want to call mom or dad. Will you help me get into a detox?" He helped me get into one, and that was the beginning of the end of that life. Took a few months to really get the hang of it, but I was destined to fix it, and I ultimately did.
What were some of those struggles when you were in rehab? 'Cause some people are saying, well, there's a lot of people that go in and out of rehab.
Yeah.
And like you said, you went through like 7 years of like, broken. What was it like? And did you come back to like Charlotte for rehab, or were you still in New York going through rehab? So where were you at that time? And then just kind of going through that process.
Yeah, rehab is interesting. There's kind of two ways to go about rehab. There's one when you're going and you know you're done and you just need help figuring out how to live life without alcohol. And then there's the I can't stop drinking. I need to go be put into a place that doesn't allow me to drink. And that's essentially kind of detox into rehab. And then there's of course rehab as a order from a judge. Those are kind of the three versions. And I did all three. The judge sent me. I couldn't stop drinking, and I thought that rehab would fix it, even though I didn't go in invested. I just knew that I needed to stop for a period of time, and I thought maybe stopping for a period of time would make me stop forever. I tried that, didn't work. And then at the final moment, I said, okay, now I'm done. I've tried every which way to drink. I've tried to do beer. I've tried to do wine. I've tried to do once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week. I've tried to only drink on a special occasion. I tried every single thing known to man. None of it worked. And then finally I said, okay, now I need to try to stop completely. And actually it wasn't this. It wasn't trying. I knew I was done. So if you want me to tell the story in the moment where I had the light go off, I can tell that story if you'd like.
We'd love to hear it.
Well, I'll try to do it without crying. Let's see here. So, yeah, you know, I talk about the 7 years, the in and out, and if you just kind of visually think about it, that way, in and out.
Mhm.
Rehab worked for a while, didn't work, went lower. Gotta, moved back to Charlotte from New York, got a little bit lower. Tried to do an outpatient program, didn't work, even got lower. And then all of a sudden I said, all right, I need to go to rehab and I want to stop drinking. And I went to rehab, but came out with this idea that I was going to drink on my wedding. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to go through the rest of my life not drinking. I know I can't control alcohol. I know I can't drink. I've tried everything, but there's gotta be a way to do it on a special occasion. And that special occasion came a little quicker than my wedding. I say that jokingly. 6 months after this rehab, I found myself in my house, my roommate out of town, my parents out of town, and I'm all by myself. And I'd been going to AA, and I knew that there was going to be one night that I was going to give it a shot. And I gave it a shot. And the next day I woke up and I thought, wow, I don't feel that bad. I think that was successful. I'm going to do it again tonight. And that's the playful way of explaining that I did it the next night and the next night and the next night. And it led to 3 months of another binge, me ending up in California, getting my 4th DUI, and the judge telling me I'm going to prison for a year. I didn't go to prison for a year. That story is one that is just really wild on how that didn't happen. It wasn't about money or connections or anything like that. It was just complete luck. But in that moment of sitting in detox the night after getting my 4th DUI and my lawyer saying you're going to prison, that's when I said, I essentially gave myself to my higher power and said, I'm done. Take it from here. And I haven't had a drink since, and it's coming up on 20 years.
Amen, brother. There it is, 20
Yeah.
years. I appreciate you sharing that, because that's, that brings back probably, a lot of emotions. And I mean,
I held
your
him in.
will, yeah. What's that?
I held him in during
Yeah,
you telling.
I just your willingness to share that. So, and the audience is going to appreciate that too. So, thank you.
Sure.
So moving
Sure.
forward, now you would host, going through all that, been through a lot, and now you're actually going to eventually start a podcast. You're on a podcast right now, sharing your story, and you would eventually host a podcast for 5 years, and it's focused on wellness and mental health. I mean, what a great topic of what you went through to help others through it, because you've been through it and you can speak to it. It's like people are not going to come on that are going through that. They're not going to come on like a podcast or talk to you if you've never been through it and you can't relate to it. It's almost like I've talked to like veterans that have been in a war-torn country and they've gone through it and they've seen things that we usually don't see. But other warriors can relate to them. It's like
Yeah.
warriors, relating to warriors, and the same thing for here, where you can be relatable to those people that are going, because I never went through it, so I couldn't relate to them, but you can.
Yeah.
So share with us about talking openly about mental health, especially for men who we often avoid those conversations. We have a lot of pride. We don't want to talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. What led to the podcast, interestingly, was I went back to grad school and got a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. So as soon as I came out of my final treatment center and knew I was done, I'm thinking, okay, what do I do now? What do I have to show for? I'm all these random jobs and these random things I did are not something I can really expand on. So what do I know? I know struggle, and I know addiction, and I know mental health, and I know what it's like to confront those things and get as vulnerable as you can possibly get. Why don't I be a therapist and help people with this? So that's what I did. I went and got a master's degree, graduated with flying colors, the best grades I ever made, and got licensed and became a therapist for a number of years, but ultimately was a coach because I just found it more gratifying. I found sitting in an office, talking one-on-one with people was wonderful, and it was some of the greatest work I'd ever done. But I thrived more out in the crisis kind of situations, and that's pretty typical for someone who's lived a life in the kind of crisis space. As you're drawn to that, you're a little more comfortable in those spaces than other people. And so that's kind of what I did for a number of years. But I will say that, having the conversations that I was having with people that are struggling like that, it's very similar to this. So sitting in an office or sitting in a room or a hotel room or wherever you are, talking one-on-one with somebody with no music, no phones, you and me looking at each other in the eyes, really trying to dig down to what's going on here, translates very well over to a podcast. It's what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
And so I had this skill set that was just perfect for a podcast. Now I was nervous, lights and cameras and hot mics and all that stuff was very out of my comfort zone. But at the time I was very into pushing myself into discomfort. And so I was like, let's do it. And so I started this podcast. It was called Champagne Problems. It was a heavier focus on alcohol as it relates to wellness, but it was always a side door into mental health and everything we're talking about. And it was just 4.5 years of me interviewing people and having deep conversations about their stories, and very similar to what we're doing here, just a little more hyper focused with alcohol and struggle. Yeah.
And then what was the reason for you getting out of the podcast? Because it sounds like you were having a lot of success with it. You did it for 4.5 years. What took you out of that? I know you started a podcast production company, but share with us along the way just the impact that had for 4.5 years of doing that podcast. Why moving out of the podcast, and then this podcast production company that you started?
Yeah, well, I think the ending of that podcast was more of a natural kind of progression to the end than anything, but it was also coupled with the fact that I was getting very burned out on the professional side of my life, which was working with addiction. That is a very tough world to work in, as you can imagine. There's not a ton of there's success, but you got to redefine what success looks like. Success doesn't mean getting sober for the rest of your life and your life turns around and everything's perfect, because that rarely happens in the time frame you'd like it to. And so it's often, I'm experiencing young guys overdosing on, what's the drug that everybody
Fentanyl?
fentanyl.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, fentanyl is making its push into the United States right when I'm working on this stuff. It's just a very tough space to work. I was moving into parenthood and, a young daughter, and I'm in Charlotte. This podcast is doing well, and I'm starting to look at the industry of podcasting. It's taking off. COVID is happening. People are listening more than anything. And all these lights are kind of going off, and these ideas are coming up, and I'm getting burned out working in addiction. And so all that kind of led to the end of my podcast and the beginning of a new life. Honestly, I put the addiction work aside. I still do a little bit for friends and family if they need it, but I go into full entrepreneur mode, and podcasting is a medium that just lights me up. It did wonders for me. It got me out of my comfort zone, and I absolutely love it. It's a wonderful industry. It's a wonderful medium. And so that's kind of what happened as far as the ending of mine and where I am now.
Well, tell us more about your podcast production company.
Yeah. So it's called Everybody Studios. The idea was to incorporate a word that just was all inclusive. I didn't want it to be, even though we kind of provide a niche service, it's not a niche in the sense of what we're putting out. It's everybody, anybody, any message, any content.
Mhm.
It's everything that we produce here. I started the company with the idea of production in mind, so recording and editing. And what I quickly realized is I'm now competing with audio video agencies that have been around for 60 and 70 years. So how can I differentiate myself? Well, if you do niche down and you do provide strategy development, of course, production, post-production, and then distribution, targeted distribution and promotion, now you've got a soup to nuts offering in this industry that is booming, that differentiates from just production. And so that's what I've built here at Everybody Studios. We offer all of those kind of silos with the medium of podcasting.
Can you say the name of it again? Because I know it's spelled a little differently that the listeners can listen
It
in and
is
hear the
like,
name.
it's the word everybody. It's just, I just took the inner vowels out. So EVRYBDY, Everybody Studios.
I love it. Hey, Everybody's Studios. There it is.
Studios.
Well, let's move forward. So you have this podcast production company. Tell us about looking back. Who were kind of people? Let's go back even further from that. Let's talk about men if they were listening in right now. And there's a number of men. This is called Men Pursuing More, not like just men. There's women listening in on this podcast as well. If a man is listening in now, quietly struggling with some type of addiction or unhealthy coping habits, what would you want him to hear from someone who's been there?
That's the golden question. And I did think a lot about this because it'd be wonderful if I could say something that was just the lights just brightened and the angels sang and everybody just got it all of a sudden. Unfortunately, there's no magic phrase. Everybody's different. Every experience is different. Every struggle is different. Every human brain is different. So as much as I would love to have the golden nugget, I will preface with that, but say that I think the seeds being planted throughout the struggle are the things that will eventually come back when your struggle reaches that tipping point. So when people often say, I can't do anything, they have to want it. They have to figure it out on their own. That's true. But these little things that people peppered into my brain and to my life throughout that decade of struggle is what all came up during that moment of breaking. It was you don't have to do this. There is a solution. There is an answer. There's nothing wrong with you. There's a million people just like you. You're not alone. Those are the things that started coming up when I was reaching that breaking point. And those are the things people said to me along the way. So that's what I would offer to anybody struggling out there are all of those phrases. And the main one being you're not alone, or the main two, you're not alone and there is an answer.
I like when you mentioned that. You're not alone and there is an answer. And I'd probably add one other thing. Listen to this podcast. Listen to your story. Don't listen because of me. Listen to your story and just listen to, our conversation. But hey, we all have issues. We're all going through stuff. I know some a little more serious than others, but everybody, you're not really true to yourself if you're not going through stuff. Everybody's going through stuff. And so part of it, you just have to be true to yourself. That's like you talked about, you got to take ownership first.
You do. And to go even deeper, and you hear this a lot in the psychology world, all of this comes from fears, right? So a fear is just a level of discomfort that we are not familiar with, which ultimately causes anxiety, which is the fear of the unknown, but it's all stemmed in fear. And so when people are listening to this who might be battling addiction or unhealthy coping mechanisms, usually it's fear of life without those things that's driving the use of it. And then the use eventually just turns into addiction because you're ultimately dependent physically and mentally on it. But it starts with fear. It starts with dealing with life without the help of something artificial. And that's scary. And once you get deeper and deeper, that fear gets more and more intense, which makes it harder and harder to pull yourself out. But that's always my message to people is the work it takes to come out of whatever hole you've dug. You're just scared of it. We all have to do it. We all dig and we all work and we all face fears and we all do things we don't want to do. That's all it takes. It's nothing other than that. And you're just scared of it. So just knowing that is the first step.
And you think of like most have probably gone through periods of time where they've had moments in their life where they were fearful of something, but they like fear of heights, whatever it might be, fear of like a relationship, but they work through it. It's like it's just one other thing you have to work through it. I know it's pretty serious, but this is life. And we all have to work through things and that kind of leads to how important, like you brought this up earlier about AA, but looking back, who are people or voices that help kind of guide you during maybe your darkest seasons, but how important is like community and mentorship? I look at sometimes AA as like a mentorship or like a community of people that has been through it for men to help them kind of heal and grow.
Yeah, great question. And you kind of answered it honestly. It's for a lot of us men, it 9 times out of 10 is another man. And if you are battling addiction, there are a lot of different methods now, AA being one of the most common and one of the most known and historical. And a lot of people find reasons why they don't want to, delve into AA. And I get that. It's taking new shapes to try to, appease everybody's new issues with AA. But what AA did for me was it led me to a sponsor, which essentially was another man or a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you do it through AA or you do it through some other avenue, find another man that you trust and work with them, talk to them, tell them how you feel, tell them how you think. Maybe it's a therapist. Go to therapy, find a man and go to a therapist. You have to find someone who you can get these things out of your brain with. Finding that person can be hard. That often comes back to some of our own stuff. Oh, I just can't find the right one. I didn't like that guy. That guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that all day. You can do that for the rest of your life. But eventually you're going to have to let your wall down and just go let it out with somebody and realize that people do know what they're talking about.
Keep going.
No, that's it. We're all going through something. We're not alone.
And we are, aren't we? And you brought up the coaching thing, how important that, set aside your pride, you might need some coaching. Or like how those words you hear, like coaching, mentorship, having maybe like a community of men. You might be married and all that, but you may need some men that really speak into you, that are maybe good examples for you. And they might be younger, they might be older, but they might be a good example for you. They might be raising kids, maybe like my girls are now in college. So I appreciate you sharing that because I think that's so important for men to hear that and find that man. Maybe it's a community of men, a mentor coach that can kind of help them through.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if, are at a point where you're not willing to take that leap to sit down one-on-one with another man, listen to a podcast, listen to people sharing their stories. You'll very quickly realize that somebody out there has been through a deeper hell than you. Well, and not that it's a competition, but it's just relatable, right?
And like your podcast, it's still out there. Once you do a podcast, It's out there. They can find it. I know it's been a couple of years since but they can go listen in on some of those podcasts. So those episodes.
There's some big stories on our podcast. There's 115 interviews, and there's some big stories.
So what was the name of your podcast again? Just for
Champagne Problem.
So Champagne Problems. Okay, Problems.
Yep.
Okay, Champagne Problems.
That was a play. People used to use that phrase, and it was something about, the metaphor was somebody who doesn't like a certain kind of champagne, like boo hoo, you're drinking champagne. This champagne's bad, or it's not cold enough. It's like boo hoo, you're drinking freaking champagne. So, oh, you've got champagne problems. It's kind of like fortunate people problems. It was kind of a play on the alcohol piece and all that.
All
Trying to
right.
make a little bit.
Yeah, I love it. All right, Robbie, as we wrap up, how about a final message for men? Maybe they're not going through, you know, trying to heal from alcohol or drugs, just men in general who are kind of pursuing more. What message you want to leave with men?
Oh man, put me on the spot there. You know, I I loved in one of your questions you mentioned the season of life, and I'm in a season of life right now where it does have a lot to do with starting a company and having people below me, or not below, but you know what I mean, like employees and people on this team. And it's really opened my eyes to the value of healthy relationships. And it makes me think deeper about relationships in general. And I go, that's all our life is filled with. It's, relationship with your parents early on, relationship with your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your friends. It's a life full of relationships. And if you're not able to understand what it takes to have a healthy relationship, which in my opinion is owning your side of the street. It's saying, I understand and I'm sorry. Instead of, yeah, but you did this, or yeah, but you made me say that, or yeah, but it's this constant like defense that leads to poor and unhealthy relationships. And I think there's a couple messages in this. Relationships being one, you've got good relationships, you're going to have a good life. But in order to have good relationships, you've got to let that ego go away. You've got to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize your flaws, admit them, don't deny them, and work on them, and also apologize for them. I found that out through marriage, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could argue for the rest of my life, or I can say, hey, I hear you and I understand and I'm sorry. And life gets really good when you start doing that.
I like that. Just the use of like the word sorry. I know sometimes people, oh, do you really mean that? It's like really intentionally be sorry.
Yeah.
Say it with intentionality and mean it. Set aside your ego. We tend, like sometimes, man, we tend to have a lot of pride. Hey, but we don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers, and everybody's going through stuff. So I appreciate that, Robbie. So, hey, thanks for your honesty, your courage, being vulnerable, with sharing your story. So where can listeners follow you and follow your story?
Well, my story, I would say this, I'm less in the world of my identity being around my recovery journey.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of moved away from that as I did that. Like I said, I'm 20 years into recovery now, and that was my identity for a long time. And while I still hold that very dear and valuable, I don't showcase it as much as I used to. If you do want to listen to the journey and really dig into some of that stuff, let's go back to my podcast, Champagne Problems. And all you have to do is search Champagne Problems Podcast, and you will see it. It is on YouTube. It is on every platform known to man. And it's riddled with incredible conversations with incredible people. That's where I would direct people. As far as following me, you can find me on some social media.
That's right. Robbie Shaw. I think people will find you.
Robbie Shaw, Robbie. All
right. Yeah. That's a wrap with Robbie Shaw. And thank you for being part of Men Pursuing More podcast.